how to palpate for a stuck rib, quote unquote. What I end up doing is using my thumb, the flat part of my thumb, and I'll start by palpating the rib just like this, and I'll feel for a inhalation fixation or an exhalation fixation. I have other videos that go into more detail on that, but for now, what I end up doing is feeling for inhalation or exhalation, inhalation or exhalation fixation of a particular rib. The other thing is I try to get close to the spine. I try not to go too far out on the lateral part because, as you know, the rib will start to make a turn, and now if I start to feel something over here, the mechanics of the rib actually will give me different indicators as to what's happening way out here compared to here, closer to the thoracic spine. When I put my thumb on a particular rib and I feel for inhalation or exhalation fixation, the reason I put my thumb flat on the rib is because that will help me to feel the edges of a rib. And when I do that, if I feel a bottom edge more easily poke out compared to a top edge, and if I feel that with my thumb, then that'll give me a better indication that it is possibly an exhalation fixation. If I feel the top edge of a rib as I'm putting the flat part of my thumb on the rib, then that'll give me an indication that I may be dealing with inhalation fixation, if that top edge of the rib is kind of poking out a little bit more. Do I start by feeling the most sunken in rib first? Let's say, for example, there was some type of rotation here and this rib was more sunken in. Do I start with this one first and not this one? Not necessarily, but most often than not, I do feel for vertebrae that are possibly a little more sunken in first, and then feel for its inhalation or exhalation fixation. You don't necessarily have to do that. It's okay if you went off to the other rib and felt for movement this way. Either way, if we're dealing with a possible rotated vertebra, you're still going to approach this vertebra in a certain way to help with derotation. And like I said before, I sometimes, more often than not, go into the rib that is actually a little more anterior. Do I incorporate breath when I'm palpating for ribs and palpating for feeling for that quote stuck rib? And the answer is yes. If I'm trying to get a little bit of validation to my finding, I may keep my thumb on that flat part of the rib and ask my client to take a full inhale and then a full exhale and see how my thumb rides. If it rides really well in the inhale and it stays there and it doesn't return back to its exhale position, then there may be an inhalation fixation. If the rib doesn't really go into much inhalation movement, but really goes into the exhalation movement, there might be an exhalation fixation. Now, keep in mind, if you're doing that with a client that's in prone position on your table, you now have the table giving an influence to the front part of the ribs. So just keep that in mind. I still think that this is a good assessment tool, even though the table may be, putting a little bit of pressure on the front part of the ribs. You'll still be able to feel for rib movement in respiration. If you want to practice that type of movement, but not have the table influence you, you can practice in seated. I do that seated work sometimes, and I'll use my fingers or thumb. But now that you've got the person in seated position, now you've got the advantage of having one hand on the posterior part of the ribs and having the other hand on the anterior part, and you can really now get a great indication of what the ribs are doing. You're kind of riding the ribs back to front. It may be a little bit more difficult for some to palpate that, but if you want to hone that skill, my suggestion is to practice it with a partner to get a sense of what may be going on with the ribs in sitting position or standing position. Hi, thanks for watching the Morales Method YouTube channel. If you'd like to check out our online school, click on the link above. Or if you'd like to explore more Morales Method content, click on the links below. Thanks again.